Okay, I'm going to quickly finish 11, and then I'm going to go ahead and go right into 12. All right, so this one, I had just finished trying to talk about Transcendentalists really quickly. Transcendentalists basically was a New England intellectual movement that began to challenge ways of thinking. During the Age of Reason, knowledge had come from experimentation. John Locke argued that knowledge came solely from the senses, and Transcendentalists said that it could come from something above the senses, trying to reach an inner light, to try the soul, to kind of reach your soul, something closer to God. And there's a lot of people that go along with those ideas. I'm going to flip through all the pictures of the societies. Ralph Waldo Emerson was one of the most famous transcendentalists. Transcendentalists kind of viewed institutions as not very important. Weren't really focused on the other movements, reform movements. Ralph Waldo Emerson, though, he was a former Unitarian pastor turned writer. He was very famous for his self-reliance speech and writing, stressing individualism, urging Americans to declare independence from Europe with their art, their literature, their thinking. There'll be a whole new literary movement, art movement that we'll be looking at. Emerson was a transcendentalist with the credentials, the success, the big name, and each individual could basically communicate with a spiritual force, challenging to question doctrines of established churches. Thoreau kind of lived that idea of trying to kind of live in harmony with nature. Went and lived in the woods for 2 years. Wrote Walden. Many of you have read that this year and know quite a bit. Walt Whitman was a poet who wrote Leaves of Grass, encouraging people to live their lives to the fullest. Transcendentalist agenda was to give freedom to the slave, well-being to the poor and the miserable, learning to the ignorant, health to the sick, and peace and justice to society. And so there's a lot going on with them. The literary movement in general, you have Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, very popular. A lot of writers, women writers as well. Louisa May Alcott, who wrote Little Women, Emily Dickinson and her love poems. There's also Edgar Allan Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville. Look on my lecture guide that's online for a lot more details on all of them. Alright, and then some of the fads and fashions that are popular at the time. There's diet fashion, or fads, this time giving up meat, coffee, tea, pastries in favor of fruit, vegetables, wheat bread. Clothing style is a little bit more loose-fitting, bloomers versus corsets. Desire for long living. Phrenology was a skull shape study to determine what you were naturally going to be good at. Spiritualism, communicating with the ghosts and spirits, and seances. So all of that kind of summing it up. I know it's kind of a weird transition, but I'm going to go straight into chapter 12. Alright, so not at all really a cohesive unit, but it'll work. We're going to go into the Age of Expansion. And I need to move my little screen over. Okay, so the Young American Movement, it was a phrase that was coined by Emerson, actually, because we're entering a new era of commercial development, railroads, territorial expansion, a lot of young Democrats, positive attitude about the market economy, and American settlement had reached the Pacific by this point, moving from the Mississippi Valley to the Pacific, most for material gain, some for adventure. A lot of settlement kind of overlapping on land that was claimed by Mexico and England. And so we're going to see some of the conflicts with that. Some of the new borders that we had, 1842, the Webster-Ashburton Treaty, settling the U.S.-Canadian border. In Maine, you had a fight over the border between the U.S., the Maine militia and the Canadian lumberjacks. It was the Aroostook War, largely by lumberjacks fighting on each side who'd get to chop down the lumber. And so Webster, our Secretary of State, met with Ashburton and made a treaty and gave half the disputed land to the U.S., basically split it. Americans also settle the Oregon Territory. It was jointly occupied by us and England. There's also a little bit of Spanish and Russian presence as well, but mostly the two of us. New Mexico Territory and California, both owned by Mexico. Both owned by Mexico. In New Mexico, this territory, they encouraged this free trade policy, and then you have in California the rancheros, and we're going to have a little bit of conflict over all that. So there's the territorial map that you guys used in class, and you guys did the homework chart. It's a really good thing to study. All right, in Texas, 1820, Americans had begun to move in with the help of Stephen F. Austin, giving land grants, trying to bring in settlers. Texas had about 300 families, 1823, and then over 2,000 over the next year. They do have problems with the Mexican rule. The Anglos never really fully accepting Mexican rule. People living in Texas had to become Mexican citizens and adopt the Catholic faith. Many are going to refuse, be arrested. Stephen F. Austin tries to help, but is also arrested. Mexico tries to abolish slavery, causes a lot of problems. And then Santa Anna comes in, becomes dictator of Mexico, gets rid of the federal system of government, sends the military into Texas to respond to them refusing to pay tariffs. And the Mexican army, led by Santa Anna, capture Goliad, attacks the Alamo in San Antonio, killing all of its American defenders. And then we're going to go into the Republic of Texas and the Revolution here in just a second. But after Texas won its national independence from Spain, Mexico had wanted more settlers, and so we're just seeing a pouring in of people and then a lot of conflict between those that were already there. All right, so for Texas declaring its independence, both Americans and Texans fought in this, fought because of the Alamo, which, by the way, was not a good point for the Americans. Everybody died. I just want to clarify that one. But the rally cry of Remember the Alamo. San Jacinto Santa Anna was defeated. He was caught by surprise by Sam Houston, and under threat of death, he was forced to sign a treaty. Santa Anna recognizes the Texas claim for independence, signs and grants a new republic to all land north of the Rio Grande. That'll be something that's a point of debate later on, is whether or not it was the Rio Grande or the Nueces River, but we'll get to that later. The question after Texas is independent is it going to be annexed to the United States? Sam Houston really fights for it, really wants it annexed. Jackson's going to refuse it. There is a lot of new settlers coming in after the 1837 panic. I know that's something we studied a long time ago, but the settlement of Americans had gone from 32,000 to 142,000, so there's a very large American presence in Texas, so it would just make sense. But Jackson's got a lot of controversy going on already and just wants to kind of sidestep that whole issue. Sam Houston. Again, I'm going to flip through pictures, so if you want to look at them, pause on your own. Okay, the trails. You have the Santa Fe Trail, closed to U.S. settlers as a result of the Mexican-American War, or sorry, not the Mexican War, Texan Revolution, and the involvement of the U.S. travelers and settlers. So the trail was denied after the Texas Revolution. Oregon Trail is another one. A lot of people taking the Oregon Trail. 2,000 miles of wagon trains and settlers took about 6 months. Oregon settlers are going to demand an end to the joint occupation. Later on, a little over 5,000 people extended to the Oregon Territory. So we have a very large presence now in Oregon. A lot of pictures. Okay, another good expansion or trail to note was the Mormon Trek. Joseph Smith founded the Church of Latter-day Saints. 1830, Mormonism was the largest religious denomination founded on American soil. Smith translated the Book of Mormon, was charged to establish a pure church on earth, and so kind of sought this revival of religion, and he was persecuted for unorthodox methods. Flees from New York to Illinois and tried settling there. Doesn't really work. Joseph Smith was actually put in jail and then was killed by a mob, so it prompts the rest of them to leave and go to Utah. Brigham Young was Smith's successor, took over the colony and took over the group, led them along the Oregon Trail, then went south to Great Salt Lake, became one of the best or most successful western colonies, and eventually Young becomes the territorial governor of Utah and works with the U.S. government in that aspect. All right, Manifest Destiny was a phrase that was coined by John O'Sullivan. His slogan believed the U.S. was divinely ordained to encompass Mexico, Canada, some even said Cuba and Central America. And so we have this undefined limits. It was first used in 1845. Said that God wanted the U.S., the chosen nation, to become a stronger, more dominant power and had more territories. John Tyler is the president at this point, kind of known as the first expansion president, or first one to kind of really mention this. He assumes the presidency after William Henry Harrison's death. Harrison died 1 month into office due to not wearing a coat during his inauguration. And Harrison, his campaign was Tippecanoe and Tyler too, and now with him dead, Tyler's become the president, and he's not really part of the Whig plan. Really has a very strong independent streak and actually breaks away from the Whigs and decides to kind of go in his own direction. He was a states' rights, pro-slavery, unites the latest version of American system, but really doesn't associate with anybody. And so when he tries to run for re-election, Tyler had negotiated the annexation with Texas as a campaign issue, and anyways, he loses the nomination for the Whig Party to Henry Clay. However, James Polk takes up that issue of expansion and Texas annexation. Polk was nominated over Van Buren because of the Texas issue, and runs on expansionist platform, promises the annexation of Texas, Oregon for the northern vote, Texas for the southern vote, kind of pulling from all the different regions. And he is elected. Before he's inaugurated, Texas is annexed, and his victory is kind of seen as a mandate for Manifest Destiny. People start believing in it, and believe it or not, Mexico was not happy that the U.S. had now annexed Texas, and so we're going to have an issue over that too. All right, so Oregon was his other campaign promise, and he's going to go with the rally cry that was 5440, or Fight 5440 was the latitude line, all the way up to the top of the territory. U.S. had a very strong claim, but he does not want to go to war with Great Britain, and so they disagree to split it on the 49th parallel to avoid war. We also get rights to the Puget Sound, which is first deep water port to the Pacific. However, the North is not happy for the fact that he did not get all of Oregon like he promised. There is the 5440 line, and then we agree on the 49th latitude. All right, so war with Mexico. This was not just over the Texas issue like most people think. The final goal was getting California, getting the land in between so we could expand all the way west. And we had a pattern. We try to buy it, and if not, we'll use force. First thing that we do is send over John Slidell to offer $25 million to Mexico. They refuse. We declare war. Three main outlets for the war was California, Texas, and Mexico. We had success in all of them. Several different generals. We have Zachary Taylor. He was very involved in taking troops to the Rio Grande. You have General Winfield Scott in Mexico City. And once we have success everywhere, we will bring about an end to the war. And again, if you want more details, please look at my lecture guides. I'm just not going to go into all of them right now because I'm going to kind of sum it up. So the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, 1846, ends the war. Mexican War, gives the U.S. Mexican cession, and establishes the Rio Grande as the southern border. So basically, the Mexican cession included parts of California, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, parts of Colorado, and Wyoming. Basically, 500,000 miles of territory, increases the U.S. by 20%, and we pressure later on, 1853, to get the rest of New Mexico and Arizona in the Gadsden Purchase, that little bit right down there. So Americans had only lost about 13,000 deaths, mostly because of disease. The question was now what to do about slavery, and so the Whigs propose we have no claim. Northerners kind of see this power of slavery extension, and so Wilmot Proviso was one of the things that was suggested. Well, David Wilmot proposed that no slavery was allowed in Mexican cession, and it was not passed. It actually passed in the House twice, but since the Senate, has an equal voice in the Senate, it's going to fail there. But even though it fails, the importance of the Wilmot Proviso is that it kind of opens these old wounds, those of slavery, and brings it back into the public eye. Okay, some of the other things with expansion, we have new technology, the telegraph, new transportation with the railroad. Actually started in 1830s. The technology came from England, but we'll develop it. Had a very little bit of railroads by the 1840s, and it's going to emerge. It's going to become the largest industry, stimulating other industries like iron. 1849, the gold rush pulls people to California, and so then we're going to start looking at transcontinental projects to connect the sections. Mass production was another thing. Factories will emerge, paying cash, division of labor to make it more efficient, gathering laborers in one place for supervision, continuous process of manufacturing. We have new inventions, invention boom. 1850s ended with 28,000 patents compared to only 306 in the 1790s. So a lot of new things, whether that was John Deere and the steel plow, or Cyrus McCormick and the mechanical reaper. And I'm going to have to continue this on another section.